The phone rang at 2 in the morning, cutting through the silence like a blade. My father's voice cracked through the speaker, trembling with panic I had never heard before. Harold was begging for $50,000 immediately because my brother Brandon's life was supposedly in danger from dangerous people. This was the same man who gave Brandon $150,000 for medical school, but coldly refused to invest even $5,000 in my landscaping business 3 years ago, dismissing it as a waste of money on dirt and grass. Now he claimed Brandon would be hurt or killed if mysterious debts weren't paid within 48 hours. 3 years earlier, I had walked into Harold's study with a leather folder containing my future. Inside were detailed financial projections, market analysis reports, and equipment cost breakdowns for the landscaping business I wanted to start. I had spent months researching suppliers, studying successful companies in neighboring counties, and calculating profit margins down to the last penny. My hands shook slightly as I placed the folder on his mahogany desk, the same desk where he had signed countless checks for Brandon's education. Harold barely glanced at the documents before pushing them back toward me. His reading glasses perched on his nose as he looked up with the expression he reserved for discussing disappointments. "Real men become doctors or lawyers, not gardeners," he said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. The dismissal hit harder than any physical blow could have. I watched him return to his paperwork, effectively ending our conversation before it had truly begun. Meanwhile, Brandon was struggling through his second year at Westfield Medical College, one of the most expensive private institutions in the state. The tuition alone cost $45,000 annually, but Harold's generosity extended far beyond academic expenses. There were monthly living allowances of $2,000, a brand new Honda Accord for campus transportation, spring break trips to Mexico, for stress relief, and summer study abroad programs in Europe that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. Brandon would call home every few weeks, always with another financial emergency. The organic chemistry textbooks cost $800. His study group needed reservations at an upscale restaurant for networking purposes. The apartment near campus required first and last month's rent plus security deposit. Harold responded to each request with immediate wire transfers, never questioning the legitimacy or necessity of these expenses. My mother Patricia had passed away 2 years earlier after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer, leaving Harold as the sole decision-maker regarding family finances. Before her death, she had always encouraged my entrepreneurial spirit, often mentioning how proud she was of my work ethic and determination. With her gentle influence gone, Harold's favoritism toward Brandon became increasingly pronounced and painful to witness. I worked 3 jobs to support myself while living in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. My days began at 5 in the morning, serving breakfast at Murphy's Diner, continued with afternoon construction work for Patterson Brothers Contracting, and ended with evening tutoring sessions for high school students struggling with mathematics. The physical exhaustion was manageable, but the emotional weight of Harold's constant comparisons felt crushing. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" he would say during our increasingly rare conversations. "Brandon's gonna save lives. Brandon's making something meaningful of himself." Brandon represents the family's future. Each comparison felt like salt in an open wound, especially knowing that Brandon's achievements were built entirely on Harold's financial foundation, while my efforts received no recognition or support. My girlfriend Sarah worked as a registered nurse at County General Hospital and often encouraged me during my lowest moments. She would remind me that success built through personal sacrifice and determination carried more value than achievements purchased with someone else's money. Her faith in my abilities provided the emotional sustenance that Harold's rejection had taken away. Sarah understood the pain of family disappointment because her own parents had initially opposed her nursing career, preferring she pursue teaching as a more traditional, feminine profession. She had worked through college, taking student loans, and picking up weekend shifts at medical clinics to fund her education. Her empathy for my situation created a bond between us that extended far beyond romantic attraction. One particularly difficult evening, I confided in Sarah about my growing resentment toward Harold's financial priorities. She listened carefully before suggesting that perhaps Harold's favoritism stemmed from his own unfulfilled dreams of becoming a physician before settling for a career in pharmaceutical sales. Her insight helped me understand that Harold's behavior, while hurtful, might reflect his own disappointments rather than my inherent inadequacy. The breaking point came during Brandon's second year when Harold revealed the full extent of his financial commitment. He had taken out a second mortgage on the family home, the same house where my mother had planted rose gardens and hosted neighborhood barbecues. The home that held 30 years of family memories was now collateral for Brandon's education, yet Harold still refused to invest $5,000 in my business proposal. I remember standing in the kitchen, where my mother used to bake cookies for school fundraisers, feeling the weight of Harold's decision settle over me like a heavy blanket. The man who claimed to love both his sons equally had mortgaged our family's stability for one child while refusing basic support for the other. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it also crystallized my determination to succeed without his help. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Harold wouldn't invest in my future, I would build it myself, $1 and one satisfied customer at a time. I refused to let his short-sightedness define my potential or limit my ambitions. The hurt would remain, but it would fuel my determination rather than crush my spirit. The climactic moment came when Harold looked me directly in the eyes and stated with absolute conviction that he wasn't throwing good money after bad ideas. Those words echoed in my mind for months afterward, becoming both a source of pain and motivation that would drive every decision I made moving forward. $700 in savings represented 3 months of eating ramen noodles and walking instead of driving whenever possible. That modest sum became the foundation for Martinez & Associates landscaping a partnership born from desperation and mutual ambition. Jake Martinez had recently lost his position as senior landscape architect at Henderson Design Group when the company downsized during an economic recession. Jake possessed 20 years of experience designing outdoor spaces for affluent clients throughout the region. His portfolio included country club grounds, corporate office complexes, and residential estates worth millions of dollars. Despite his impressive credentials, age discrimination in the job market made finding new employment nearly impossible. Companies preferred hiring younger graduates who would accept lower salaries and longer hours. Our first meeting took place at Rosie's Coffee Shop on Main Street, where Jake studied my business proposal over black coffee and day-old pastries. His weathered hands traced the financial projections, while his experienced eyes evaluated my market research. Most established professionals would have dismissed a 26-year-old with no formal landscaping education, but Jake saw something different in my enthusiasm and work ethic. We shook hands that morning, agreeing to split profits equally while sharing both responsibilities and risks. Jake would handle design and technical aspects, while I managed customer relations and business operations. Our combined expertise created a formidable team despite our limited startup capital and lack of established clientele. The first month involved purchasing used equipment from bankruptcy auctions and estate sales. A 15-year-old pickup truck with significant mileage but a reliable engine cost $3,000. Lawn mowers, hedge trimmers, and basic tools consumed another $2,000. Jake contributed his personal collection of design software and drafting equipment assets worth considerably more than my financial investment. Our initial clients came from Craigslist advertisements and neighborhood flyers posted on community bulletin boards. Mrs. Henderson needed weekly lawn maintenance for her modest ranch house. Mr. Peterson wanted overgrown shrubs trimmed and shaped around his front porch. These small jobs paid between $50 and $100 each, barely covering fuel costs and equipment maintenance. Sarah proved invaluable during those early months handling bookkeeping and customer service calls while maintaining her full-time nursing schedule. Her organizational skills transformed our chaotic startup into a legitimate business with proper invoicing, appointment scheduling, and client record keeping. She refused payment for her contributions, insisting that our shared future depended on the company's success. The breakthrough came through Mrs. Margaret Thompson, an elderly widow who lived in Willowbrook Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our county. Her late husband had designed their garden as an anniversary gift 20 years earlier, but age and arthritis prevented her from maintaining its original beauty. Jake's restoration plan revived the space, magnificently incorporating modern irrigation techniques with classic design elements. Margaret was so impressed with our work that she hosted a garden party specifically to showcase the transformation. 12 neighbors attended, each representing households with substantial disposable income and appreciation for quality landscaping. By evening's end, we had secured consultations with 8 potential clients and collected business cards from local real estate agents who specialized in luxury properties. Word spread through Willowbrook Estates like wildfire during the following weeks. Homeowners competed to outdo their neighbors' outdoor spaces, creating a demand for increasingly elaborate designs. Jake's artistic vision combined with my customer service approach resulted in projects that exceeded client expectations while generating substantial profits. I enrolled in evening business management courses at the local community college, studying marketing strategies, financial planning, and small business operations. The knowledge gained from these classes helped me develop pricing structures, employee benefit packages, and expansion strategies that positioned our company for sustained growth. Within 18 months, our workforce had expanded from 2 partners to 8 full-time employees. We hired Roberto Silva as irrigation specialist, Tommy Walsh for hardscaping projects, and Lisa Chen as office manager. Each new hire brought specialized skills that allowed us to accept larger, more complex contracts. Harold never acknowledged our success, continuing to praise Brandon's academic achievements while ignoring my business accomplishments. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance, as Harold recounted Brandon's latest examination scores or internship opportunities. The contrast between his enthusiasm for Brandon's theoretical knowledge and indifference toward my practical achievements remained painfully obvious. Brandon would call occasionally, usually when he needed money for unexpected expenses. Spring break trips, study materials, or apartment upgrades always seemed to require emergency funding. During these conversations, he rarely asked about my work or personal life, treating me more like an acquaintance than a brother. Sarah and I became engaged during our second year of business operation, planning a modest ceremony that reflected our values and financial priorities. We wanted to invest in our future together rather than spending excessively on a single day of celebration. Harold offered minimal enthusiasm for our engagement, making subtle comments about Brandon's future potential to attract a more accomplished spouse. The City Parks Department contract represented our most significant achievement to date. After months of competitive bidding against established firms, Martinez and Associates won the rights to maintain and upgrade recreational facilities throughout 3 counties. The 2-year agreement was worth $200,000, annually more money than I had ever imagined earning. The morning I signed the contract, I felt validation for every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every moment of self-doubt I had endured. This was proof that hard work and determination could overcome family favoritism and financial disadvantage. I had built something meaningful without Harold's support, creating employment opportunities for others while establishing financial security for Sarah and myself. Harold's reaction to news of the municipal contract was predictably dismissive. He called it temporary luck, suggesting that government contracts were unreliable and that real success required advanced education and professional credentials. His inability to acknowledge my achievement hurt, but it no longer carried the devastating power it once possessed. The climactic moment came when Harold stated with complete certainty that my success was merely a fortunate coincidence rather than the result of skill planning and dedication. His words crystallized my understanding that some people would never recognize accomplishments that didn't fit their narrow definition of success, regardless of evidence to the contrary. The phone call shattered the peaceful silence of our bedroom at exactly 2:17 in the morning. Sarah stirred beside me as I fumbled for the device, recognizing Harold's number on the display. His voice sounded completely different from the confident, dismissive tone I knew so well. Panic had replaced arrogance, creating a tremor that made his words difficult to understand. Harold spoke rapidly, his sentences tumbling together in a stream of desperate explanations. Brandon owed money to dangerous people who had threatened physical harm. These weren't ordinary creditors or collection agencies, but individuals who used violence to enforce payment deadlines. Harold claimed they had given Brandon 48 hours to produce $50,000 or face consequences that could leave him permanently injured or worse. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, trying to process the gravity of what Harold was describing. Brandon supposedly had borrowed from loan sharks to cover medical school expenses that exceeded even Harold's generous financial support. The interest rates were astronomical, compounding daily, creating a debt spiral that had trapped him in a situation beyond his control. Harold's voice cracked as he described the threatening messages Brandon had received. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, photos of Brandon leaving campus buildings, proving these people knew his schedule and location. Written warnings slipped under his apartment door, detailing exactly what would happen if payment wasn't received on schedule. The specificity of Harold's descriptions made the threats seem terrifyingly real. I demanded to speak with Brandon directly, wanting to hear the situation from his own perspective before making any decisions. Harold's response surprised me. He said Brandon was too ashamed and scared to discuss the matter himself. The stress had affected his ability to think clearly, and he had asked Harold to handle all communications regarding the debt situation. This explanation seemed odd considering Brandon's typically confident demeanor and his willingness to discuss previous financial problems openly. However, genuine fear could certainly alter someone's behavior patterns, making them withdraw from normal social interactions. Perhaps the gravity of physical threats had overwhelmed his usual self-assurance. Harold appealed to family loyalty with increasing desperation. He reminded me that Brandon was my only brother, my only remaining immediate family member besides himself. Blood relationships created obligations that transcended past disagreements or hurt feelings. Family members were supposed to protect each other during crisis situations, setting aside personal grievances for the greater good. Sarah had awakened fully by this point, listening to Harold's side of the conversation with growing concern. She whispered suggestions about verifying the story's details before committing to any financial assistance. Her nursing experience had taught her that crisis situations often involved incomplete information and emotional manipulation, making careful evaluation essential. Harold's emotional state continued deteriorating throughout our conversation. He described sleepless nights spent worrying about Brandon's safety. He had already liquidated every available asset, selling family heirlooms, cashing out retirement accounts, and borrowing against his life insurance policy. The total amount raised was insufficient to meet the debt requirements, leaving him desperate for additional sources. I agreed to meet Harold in person to discuss the situation more thoroughly. Something about conducting this conversation over the phone felt inadequate, given the serious nature of his claims. Face-to-face communication would allow me to better assess his emotional state and evaluate the credibility of his story. We met at Miller's Coffee House on Elm Street the next morning, a neutral location where we could speak privately without interruption. Harold looked haggard, his usually neat appearance disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He clutched a manila folder containing what he claimed was evidence of Brandon's predicament. Harold showed me text messages allegedly sent from Brandon's phone, describing the threats in disturbing detail. The messages mentioned specific amounts owed, payment deadlines, and consequences for non-compliance. The language seemed authentic, filled with fear and desperation that would be difficult to fabricate convincingly. His hands shook noticeably as he explained the timeline of events. Brandon had initially borrowed small amounts to cover unexpected expenses during his third year of medical school. The loans seemed manageable at first, but compounding interest and additional fees had multiplied the original debt exponentially. What began as $5,000 had grown to $50,000 within 6 months. Harold revealed additional financial pressures that complicated the situation further. He had remortgaged the family home for the third time to fund Brandon's education, pushing the loan to value ratio beyond safe limits. The monthly payments consumed most of his retirement income, leaving little room for emergency expenses of this magnitude. Throughout our conversation, I noticed inconsistencies in Harold's story that raised questions about its accuracy. The timeline he provided didn't align with Brandon's academic schedule as I understood it. The amounts mentioned seemed to change slightly each time he repeated certain details. These discrepancies could result from stress and sleep deprivation, but they warranted further investigation. Harold began crying as he described his deepest fear, losing both his home and his son within the same month. The bank had already issued foreclosure warnings due to missed mortgage payments, and now these mysterious creditors threatened Brandon's physical safety. He felt overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control, facing multiple crises simultaneously. The climactic revelation came when Harold admitted that Brandon hadn't contacted him directly in 6 months. All information about the debt situation, the threats, and Brandon's current circumstances came through Derek Hoffman, Brandon's roommate. Derek claimed that Brandon was missing and in hiding, too frightened to communicate with family members directly for fear of endangering them. This admission changed everything. If Harold's information was secondhand filtered through a roommate I had never met, then the entire story required independent verification. The urgency Harold felt might be based on incomplete or inaccurate information, making any hasty financial decisions potentially disastrous for everyone involved. The drive to Westfield Medical College took 3 hours through winding mountain roads that eventually opened into the picturesque valley where the campus nestled among centuries-old oak trees. I had called ahead to schedule a meeting with the registrar's office, claiming I needed to verify my brother's enrollment for insurance purposes. The administrative assistant was helpful and efficient, pulling Brandon's academic records within minutes of my arrival. What I discovered contradicted everything Harold had told me. Brandon had officially withdrawn from medical school 8 months earlier, citing personal reasons and financial hardship. His final semester grades showed failing marks in 3 core courses with incomplete assignments in 2 others. The registrar explained that students facing academic dismissal sometimes chose voluntary withdrawal to avoid permanent notation on their transcripts. The registrar's records indicated that Brandon owed the university $47,000 in unpaid tuition and fees. His student account had been frozen, preventing him from obtaining transcripts or re-enrolling until the debt was satisfied. This information directly contradicted Harold's belief that Brandon was still actively pursuing his medical degree. Brandon's last known address led me to a rundown apartment complex near the campus, where peeling paint and broken sidewalks suggested that most residents were struggling financially. The building manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, confirmed that Brandon had vacated his unit 3 months earlier, leaving behind personal belongings and owing significant back rent. Derek Hoffman answered the door of apartment 2B, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and basketball shorts. He was younger than I had expected, probably 22 or 23, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors. His nervous demeanor became apparent immediately when I introduced myself as Brandon's brother. Derek confirmed that Brandon had moved out months earlier without providing a forwarding address or contact information. He claimed Brandon had been struggling with depression and anxiety related to his academic failures, often staying in his room for days without showering or eating regular meals. The stress of medical school had overwhelmed Brandon's ability to cope with normal responsibilities. When I mentioned Harold's concerns about dangerous creditors threatening Brandon's safety, Derek's reaction was revealing. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact while providing vague responses about Brandon's financial difficulties. His body language suggested knowledge he wasn't sharing, making me suspect there was more to this story than he was admitting. Derek eventually revealed that Brandon had developed a serious gambling addiction during his final year of medical school. What began as occasional poker games with classmates had escalated into compulsive betting on online sports platforms and frequent trips to nearby casinos. Brandon would disappear for entire weekends, returning with either large amounts of cash or devastating losses that sent him into emotional spirals. The gambling addiction had consumed Brandon's living expenses, tuition money, and eventually led to borrowing from multiple sources. Derek estimated that Brandon had accumulated credit card debt exceeding $30,000 plus casino markers and personal loans from classmates who were later unable to collect repayment. However, Derek insisted that Brandon had never borrowed from loan sharks or faced physical threats from creditors. Derek's most shocking admission concerned his own role in the situation. He had been calling Harold periodically over the past 6 months, requesting money on Brandon's behalf for various fabricated emergencies. Derek claimed he needed funds for medical expenses, textbook costs, and apartment repairs, but had actually used the money to cover his own gambling losses and drug purchases. I recorded our conversation on my phone, wanting documented evidence of Derek's confession. He seemed relieved to finally tell someone the truth, admitting that maintaining the deception had become increasingly stressful. Derek had never expected Harold to be so generous or trusting, making the scam easier to continue than he had anticipated. Derek provided Brandon's current phone number and last known location, a casino hotel in Las Vegas, where he worked as a dealer to pay for basic living expenses. Brandon had assumed a false identity to avoid creditors using his middle name and their mother's maiden name on employment applications. Derek emphasized that Brandon had never asked him to contact Harold or request money from family members. The phone call with Brandon was surreal, hearing my brother's voice for the first time in over a year while he stood on a casino floor with slot machines chiming in the background. Brandon sounded tired but not frightened, certainly not like someone hiding from dangerous criminals threatening his life. His tone was casual, almost indifferent, as he explained his situation. Brandon confirmed Derek's account of his academic failure and gambling addiction. He expressed no remorse for lying to Harold about his continued enrollment or for the financial burden his deception had created. Brandon blamed our family for pressuring him into medical school, claiming he had never wanted to become a doctor but felt obligated to fulfill Harold's expectations. When I confronted Brandon about Derek's manipulation of Harold, his response was chilling. Brandon showed no concern for Harold's financial predicament or emotional distress. He dismissed Derek's actions as Derek's problem, refusing to accept any responsibility for the consequences of his own lies and abandonment of family obligations. Brandon's selfishness was breathtaking in its completeness. He expressed no interest in returning home to explain the situation to Harold or in helping to resolve the financial crisis his deception had created. Brandon seemed to view his family as temporary sources of funding rather than people deserving honesty and consideration. The final piece of the puzzle emerged when I contacted Harold's neighbors and church friends to verify Derek's claims about borrowed money. Mrs. Patterson next door confirmed that Harold had borrowed $5,000 6 months earlier, promising repayment when Brandon finished medical school and began earning a doctor's salary. Pastor Williams revealed that Harold had borrowed another $8,000 from the church building fund for Brandon's supposed emergency medical treatment. The scope of Harold's financial devastation became clear through these conversations. He had borrowed over $30,000 from community members based on false information about Brandon's academic progress and future earning potential. These were people who trusted Harold's word and believed they were helping a young man pursue a noble profession, not funding a gambling addiction and elaborate deception. The climactic discovery came when I learned that Harold had been using his own credit cards to make minimum payments on the community loans, creating a debt spiral that would eventually consume his remaining assets. He was essentially borrowing money to service other borrowed money, a financial strategy that could only end in complete bankruptcy and loss of community respect. Confronting Derek at his apartment required careful planning and emotional preparation. I brought Jake along as backup, wanting a witness to any admissions Derek might make and protection in case the situation became hostile. Derek's initial reaction to seeing both of us at his door suggested he understood the seriousness of our visit. Derek invited us inside where empty pizza boxes and beer cans covered most surfaces in the cramped living room. The apartment smelled of stale cigarettes and unwashed laundry, creating an atmosphere of neglect that reflected Derek's character. He offered us drinks, probably attempting to ease the tension, but we declined and got straight to business. When I played the recorded confession from our previous conversation, Derek's face went pale. He had apparently hoped that I wouldn't follow up on our discussion or take action based on his admissions. The reality of potential consequences was clearly something he hadn't considered when maintaining his deception. Derek attempted to justify his actions by claiming he needed money for legitimate medical expenses related to a chronic condition. However, when I asked for documentation or medical bills to support this claim, he became evasive and angry. Derek accused me of harassment and threatened to call campus security if we didn't leave immediately. Jake's presence proved invaluable during this confrontation. His calm demeanor and professional appearance lent credibility to our questions, while his size discouraged Derek from becoming physically aggressive. Jake asked pointed questions about the timeline of Derek's communications with Harold, forcing Derek to provide specific details that revealed the extent of his manipulation. Derek eventually broke down and provided a full confession. He had been forging text messages from Brandon to make Harold's concerns seem legitimate and urgent. Derek used photo editing software to create fake screenshots of threatening messages playing on Harold's worst fears about his son's safety. The sophistication of Derek's deception was disturbing, requiring significant planning and technical skill. The money Derek had received from Harold totaled over $15,000 across multiple fabricated emergencies. Derek admitted using these funds to pay for cocaine, marijuana, and his own gambling losses at local card games. None of the money had been used for medical expenses or legitimate emergencies as he had claimed to Harold. Harold's initial reaction to Derek's recorded confession was complete denial. He refused to believe that someone would orchestrate such an elaborate deception, insisting that Derek must be lying now to avoid responsibility for failing to help Brandon. Harold's emotional investment in Brandon's success made accepting the truth almost impossible. I showed Harold the evidence systematically: Brandon's withdrawal from medical school, Derek's confession about forging messages, Brandon's casual admission of his gambling addiction and lies. Each piece of documentation chipped away at Harold's delusions until the complete picture became undeniable. His worldview collapsed as he realized the extent of manipulation he had endured. Harold aged years in the span of our conversation. The confident man who had dismissed my business dreams and proclaimed Brandon's superiority was replaced by a broken father who had been systematically deceived by people he trusted. His hands trembled as he reviewed the evidence, muttering apologies and expressions of disbelief. The financial damage was staggering. Harold revealed that he had refinanced the family home 4 times to support Brandon's supposed medical education, owing over $200,000 on a property worth $170,000. The mortgage payments consumed his entire retirement income, leaving him dependent on Social Security and occasional consulting work. While we were discussing Harold's situation, a certified letter arrived from First National Bank. The foreclosure notice was official and final, giving Harold 30 days to vacate the premises unless he could arrange payment of $43,000 in past due amounts. The timing seemed cruelly ironic, arriving just as Harold learned the truth about Brandon's deception. Harold's health deteriorated noticeably during our conversation. The stress of financial ruin combined with emotional betrayal caused chest pains and shortness of breath that required medical attention. Sarah, with her nursing background, monitored his vital signs while I called his physician to report his symptoms and request guidance. The community impact of Harold's financial crisis extended far beyond our family. Mrs. Patterson had borrowed against her own home to lend Harold $5,000, believing she was helping a future doctor establish his career. Pastor Williams faced questions from church board members about the missing building fund money that Harold had borrowed for Brandon's fictitious medical emergency. The scope of Harold's borrowing included 12 different sources, neighbors, church members, former colleagues, and family friends who trusted his word and believed in Brandon's potential. The total amount borrowed from community members exceeded $30,000 money that many of these people could not afford to lose. Harold's reputation in our small town faced complete destruction. He had been a respected pharmaceutical sales representative for 35 years, known for his integrity and reliability. The revelation that he had borrowed money based on false information about his son's circumstances threatened to destroy relationships built over decades. The most devastating aspect of Harold's situation was his use of credit cards to make minimum payments on the community loans. He had been maintaining the illusion of financial stability by creating additional debt, hoping that Brandon would eventually graduate and begin repaying everyone. This strategy had pushed his total debt beyond any reasonable ability to repay. Harold attended a support group meeting for families of gambling addicts, where he learned about enabling behaviors and the importance of setting boundaries with addicted family members. The other parents shared similar stories of financial ruin and emotional manipulation, helping Harold understand that his experience was unfortunately common. The climactic moment came when Brandon called Harold directly for the first time in months, completely unaware that his lies had been exposed. Brandon's phone call was shocking in its timing, and content arriving just as Harold was beginning to understand the full scope of his son's deception and selfishness. Brandon's request during this call was breathtaking in its audacity. He wanted $5,000 for what he called a business opportunity at the casino, some kind of investment scheme that would supposedly generate quick profits. Brandon spoke as if nothing had changed, as if Harold was still the naive father, willing to fund any request without question. The realization that I needed to save Harold, despite years of favoritism and rejection, required significant soul-searching and emotional growth on my part. This wasn't about gaining his approval or proving my worth anymore. It was about doing what was right for a family member in crisis regardless of past hurts or disappointments. I developed a comprehensive plan to address Harold's financial emergency while establishing boundaries that would prevent future manipulation. The solution required using my business profits as collateral, but also demanded that Harold acknowledge his mistakes and commit to changing his behavior patterns moving forward. My conditions for helping were non-negotiable and clearly stated. Harold had to publicly admit his favoritism toward Brandon and apologize for dismissing my business efforts and personal achievements. He needed to attend financial counseling sessions to learn money management skills and recognize manipulation tactics. Most importantly, Harold had to allow me to manage his remaining assets and oversee any future financial decisions. The mortgage restructuring negotiations with First National Bank took place over several tense meetings in their conference room. Bank President Michael Stevens was initially skeptical about accepting my business as collateral for Harold's debt, but our municipal contracts and strong financial statements convinced him to consider alternative arrangements. I proposed a payment plan that would prevent foreclosure while gradually reducing Harold's debt burden. Martinez and Associates would guarantee monthly payments of $3,000 for 18 months, using our city contracts as security. This arrangement would cost my business $54,000, but would save the family home and prevent Harold's complete financial ruin. The community repayment plan required individual negotiations with each person Harold had borrowed from, explaining the situation honestly while arranging realistic payment schedules. Mrs. Patterson was understanding when I explained Brandon's deception, agreeing to monthly payments of $250 until her $5,000 loan was repaid. Pastor Williams was more difficult to convince, but eventually accepted a similar arrangement for the church building fund. Confronting Brandon via video call with Harold present was emotionally challenging, but necessary for Harold's healing process. Brandon's reaction to seeing me on screen was surprise, followed by annoyance, as if my involvement in family matters was inappropriate. His casual demeanor showed no recognition of the crisis his lies had created. Brandon's response to learning about Derek's confession and Harold's financial ruin was chilling in its selfishness. He showed no remorse for the pain he had caused, no concern for Harold's welfare, and no willingness to accept responsibility for his actions. Brandon actually seemed angry that his deception had been discovered, as if we had violated his privacy by investigating his lies. When Harold confronted Brandon about the gambling addiction and academic failure, Brandon became defensive and hostile. He blamed Harold for pressuring him into medical school, claiming he had never wanted to become a doctor. Brandon accused our family of forcing expectations on him that were unrealistic and unfair. Brandon's suggestion that Harold should have been smarter with money was the final straw for Harold's patience. This was his beloved son, the child he had sacrificed everything to support, telling him that financial ruin was his own fault for being trusting and generous. The cruelty of Brandon's response opened Harold's eyes to his son's true character. When Brandon hung up the video call without offering to help or even apologizing, Harold finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had enabled a selfish, manipulative person at the expense of his relationship with his other son. The favoritism that had seemed justified by Brandon's potential was revealed as misguided and harmful to everyone involved. I established strict boundaries regarding future contact with Brandon. Harold was not allowed to send money, accept collect calls, or respond to any requests for assistance without my approval. These rules were designed to prevent further manipulation and protect Harold's emotional well-being during his recovery process. Finding Harold suitable employment required leveraging my business contacts and community relationships. Tom Patterson, who owned Patterson Brothers Contracting, agreed to hire Harold as a part-time project consultant, drawing on his decades of sales experience to help secure new clients. The position paid $1,500 monthly, providing Harold with income and purpose. Harold's downsizing process was emotionally difficult, but financially necessary. We found him a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment, 3 miles from my home, close enough for regular contact, but independent enough to maintain his dignity. The apartment cost $800 monthly, well within his reduced income capabilities. Harold began attending Gamblers Anonymous family support meetings to understand addiction and enabling behaviors. These sessions helped him recognize that his financial generosity had actually harmed Brandon by preventing him from facing natural consequences for his choices. The other family members shared similar experiences of manipulation and financial loss. Harold started working part-time for Martinez and Associates, initially handling customer service calls and scheduling appointments. His sales background proved valuable for client relations, and his genuine enthusiasm for learning about landscaping impressed our customers. Harold's willingness to start over at age 62 demonstrated remarkable humility and determination. The therapy sessions Harold attended focused on examining his parenting choices and relationship patterns with both sons. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison helped Harold understand how his favoritism had damaged both children in different ways, spoiling Brandon while emotionally neglecting me. These insights were painful but necessary for Harold's personal growth. Harold's transformation became apparent through his interactions with our employees and customers. He treated everyone with respect and genuine interest, asking about their families and remembering personal details. This was a stark contrast to the dismissive attitude he had previously shown toward people in service professions. The climactic confrontation occurred when Brandon appeared unexpectedly at Harold's former house, now scheduled for bank foreclosure. Brandon had driven from Las Vegas believing he could manipulate Harold into giving him inheritance money, completely unaware that Harold's financial situation had changed dramatically, or that I was now managing his affairs. Brandon's surprise at finding the house empty and learning about Harold's reduced circumstances was genuine. He had assumed that Harold's financial resources were unlimited and that his absence wouldn't affect the family's wealth. The reality that his actions had consequences was apparently a completely foreign concept to him. Brandon's unexpected arrival at the family home created the final confrontation that would determine the future of our family relationships. He stood in the empty living room where our mother's piano had once filled corners with music, surrounded by cardboard boxes containing the remnants of Harold's downsized life. His confusion was obvious as he surveyed the bare walls and missing furniture. The shock on Brandon's face when Harold explained the foreclosure and financial ruin was almost comical. He had apparently assumed that Harold's money was infinite, that years of lies and manipulation would have no lasting consequences. Brandon's first question wasn't about Harold's well-being or emotional state, but about where his inheritance had gone and why nobody had informed him of these changes. Harold's transformation was remarkable to witness. The broken, desperate man who had begged for $50,000 6 months earlier had been replaced by someone with dignity and self-respect. Harold looked Brandon directly in the eyes and explained that there were no assets remaining, no inheritance to claim, and no more money available for gambling debts or casino investments. Brandon's reaction revealed his true character completely. Instead of apologizing for the pain his lies had caused or offering to help repair the damage, he became angry and demanding. Brandon threatened legal action to claim his rightful share of family assets, apparently believing he was entitled to wealth that no longer existed because of his own actions. When Harold refused to provide financial assistance, Brandon's mask of charm and manipulation finally slipped completely. He called Harold stupid for trusting Derek and blamed him for not recognizing obvious lies. Brandon showed no understanding that his own abandonment and deception had created the crisis that destroyed Harold's financial stability. I remained calm throughout Brandon's tantrum, explaining that I now managed Harold's finances and that no money would be provided for any purpose. Brandon's attempt to appeal to family loyalty was laughable, given his complete abandonment of family responsibilities for over a year. His selective memory about family obligations was breathtaking in its hypocrisy. Brandon's threat to cut contact with the family permanently was meant to be devastating, but actually felt liberating. Harold had finally recognized that maintaining a relationship with someone who only caused pain and financial hardship served no positive purpose. Sometimes the greatest gift a toxic person can give is their absence from your life. The moment Brandon stormed out of the empty house marked the end of Harold's enabling behavior and the beginning of his authentic relationship with his remaining family. Harold stood straighter as the door slammed, as if Brandon's departure had lifted a weight he had been carrying for years. The son he had sacrificed everything to support had revealed himself as unworthy of that sacrifice. Harold's public apology took place at the grand opening celebration for Martinez and Associates' new office building. Over 100 community members attended the event, including many people who had lent Harold money based on false information about Brandon's medical career. Harold's speech was heartfelt and genuine, acknowledging his mistakes without making excuses. Harold specifically apologized to me in front of the gathered crowd, admitting that his favoritism had been unfair and that he had failed to recognize my achievements and potential. He praised my integrity, work ethic, and loyalty during his crisis, acknowledging that I had saved him despite having every reason to refuse help. The community's response to Harold's honesty was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated his willingness to accept responsibility and make amends rather than hiding from his mistakes. Several attendees mentioned that his courage in facing the truth had increased their respect for him rather than diminishing it. Harold began working full-time for Martinez and Associates as our senior customer relations specialist. His pharmaceutical sales background translated perfectly to landscape consulting, and his genuine enthusiasm for learning the business impressed clients and employees alike. Harold's transformation from dismissive parent to dedicated employee was inspiring for everyone who witnessed it. The financial recovery plan proceeded ahead of schedule thanks to Harold's contributions and our expanding business success. The municipal contract renewal included additional services worth $300,000 annually, providing more than enough resources to maintain our community payment obligations while growing the company further. Harold attended weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Morrison, working through decades of misguided parenting choices and relationship patterns. He learned to recognize manipulation tactics and enabling behaviors, developing healthier boundaries for all his relationships. Harold's emotional growth was as impressive as his professional development. Sarah and I were married the following spring in a beautiful outdoor ceremony at Willowbrook Gardens, a venue we had designed for the community center. Harold walked me down the aisle with genuine pride, offering a blessing that acknowledged our partnership as equals rather than treating Sarah as my subordinate. His evolution from dismissive father to supportive family member was complete. The wedding reception featured speeches from employees, clients, and community members who had witnessed our family's transformation. Mrs. Thompson spoke about the power of forgiveness and second chances, while Pastor Williams discussed redemption and the importance of authentic relationships over superficial success. Harold's new apartment became a gathering place for family dinners and holiday celebrations. He learned to cook simple meals and took pride in hosting Sarah and me regularly, often sharing stories about his growing appreciation for manual labor and honest work. Harold's contentment was obvious and infectious. The greatest satisfaction came from building something meaningful together, rather than competing for approval or recognition. Harold and I developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than obligation or guilt. Our conversations focused on future plans and positive developments, rather than past hurts or disappointments. Harold never heard from Brandon again, which was exactly as it should be. Some relationships are too damaged by selfishness and manipulation to repair, and recognizing that truth represents wisdom rather than failure. Harold's peace of mind improved significantly once he stopped hoping for Brandon to change or return. The business continued growing beyond our most optimistic projections, eventually employing 23 people and serving 5 counties. Harold's sales skills helped secure commercial contracts with shopping centers, office complexes, and municipal facilities throughout the region. Our success was built on integrity, hard work, and genuine care for customer satisfaction. Harold's health improved dramatically once the stress of financial crisis and family manipulation was removed from his life. His blood pressure normalized, his sleep patterns returned to normal, and his overall energy increased significantly. The correlation between emotional well-being and physical health was obvious in Harold's transformation. The life lesson from our experience is profound and universal. True family support means holding loved ones accountable for their actions rather than enabling destructive behavior. Unconditional love doesn't require unconditional financial support or tolerance for manipulation and lies. Sometimes the most loving action is refusing to participate in someone's self-destructive choices. Success earned through hard work and integrity creates lasting satisfaction that no amount of favoritism or financial shortcuts can provide. Building something meaningful from nothing generates pride and confidence that inherited wealth or unearned advantages cannot replicate. The struggle makes the achievement worthwhile. The greatest victory isn't defeating others or proving them wrong, but building something meaningful despite obstacles and demonstrating that character matters more than circumstances. Harold learned that supporting the wrong child for the wrong reasons had harmed everyone involved, while recognizing genuine effort and integrity would have strengthened the entire family. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or accepting continued abuse. Harold forgave Brandon for his lies and manipulation while maintaining boundaries that prevented future harm. This balance between compassion and self-protection allowed Harold to find peace without becoming a victim again. The transformation of our relationship from favoritism and disappointment to mutual respect and partnership proves that people can change when they choose to face truth rather than maintaining comfortable illusions. Harold's willingness to admit mistakes and accept help created possibilities that seemed impossible during our worst conflicts. Family loyalty works both ways, requiring contribution and consideration from all parties rather than one-sided sacrifice and support. Brandon's expectation of continued financial assistance without reciprocal care or honesty violated the basic principles that make family relationships meaningful and sustainable. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family that affected your relationships and self-worth? How did you handle the situation, and what lessons did you learn about building your own success despite lack of family support? Share your thoughts in the comments below about overcoming family challenges and building meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Please like this story. If it resonated with your own experiences, subscribe for more true stories about family dynamics and personal growth. And share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding the importance of accountability in family relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it provides insight and encouragement for anyone facing similar challenges with family favoritism or manipulation. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition, but by your own integrity and the positive impact you create in the world.